Nightclubs in Sunderland still exist. In fact, there are several quite good ones. But it's fair to say that most of them, as I remember from 20, 30 and more years ago, have dwindled. One of the reasons for this is the 2003 Licensing Act. That came into force in 2005, and it meant that you didn't have to go nightclubbing so much, simply because the pubs were open for longer. However, some great memories. I remember, if you wanted a cheap week, Monday night was in Chambers, Tuesday night was Q Club, Wednesday night was pretty much everywhere, Thursday night the Blue Monkey, and that brought you to the weekend, where you can go out and have a really good drink. Anyway, here is a little nostalgic look at nightclubs of Sunderland from yesteryear. Genevieve's is a nightclub I remember only as a youth. I never went in as an adult. There used to be a young hooligans night every Tuesday, and I used to attend that. It's now been replaced by this beautiful building you can see behind us. It was the spiritual home of a vibrant robotic dancing scene, which Sunderland was famed for back then, and many a heart as well as circuit was broken. I once won a stack of vinyl records when I embarked on the stage and was able to spell Genevieve's to a stunned audience. And the only one I can remember, I'd never heard of any of them apart from On the Wings of Love by Jeffrey Osborne. I gave it to my Auntie Anna. I'm standing in a place which many of you probably don't realise is called Dixons Square. This was home to quite an infamous nightclub called eponymously Dixons, one which I never set foot in, and with good reason. It was apparently the easiest nightclub in the known world in which to get into a fight. Patrons are said to have moved from here to Tijuana and Colombia in order to avoid violence. It was knocked down with shameless disregard for our architectural heritage, maybe about 20 years ago now. Others contend that it was quite a swish establishment where young executives would meet of an evening for mottled oysters and champagne, but they were probably lying. Annabelles was a nightclub situated originally where Primark now stands at the top of Walworth Way in what is now the Bridges. It was a second floor establishment. It moved in the late 1980s a very short distance to the area behind me. It was only recently demolished as a building, along with, sadly, Luciano's restaurant and happily Idles, the pub. It was an old-style glitter ball establishment and very popular back in the day. You would see the occasional celebrity in there even. Fondly remembered and possibly the best remembered on the list. This was a nightclub with a reputation for attracting a slightly more mature crowd. Indeed, some of its patrons were over 25 years old, which hardly warrants the uncharitable nickname it was given at the time. Really, Annabelles. Not very nice. The sign behind me says venue. I really don't know which venue it refers to, but I remember this building being Q Club. Your opinion is at least as good as mine, but for my money this is the best club as was on this list. The music was certainly a cut above, and people who went in there, quite intellectual by comparison, whispered. But I went in anyway. But if we're honest, the main allure of this place was that back in the day it sold shots of spirits for 20 pence. 20 pence. I have to say that even back in the day, 20 pence wouldn't buy you anything then either. Chambers was a nightclub which opened in 1987, although the building is considerably older. Grade 2 listed Victorian, in fact, Hutchison's buildings. It occupied the ground floor and the first floor. Quite a standard nightclub really, but remembered by many for the overzealous use of its dry ice machine. They loved a bit of dry ice in Chambers. Here in Bedford Street there was once a pub called the Garrick's Head, but better remembered for a nightclub next door, the Blue Monkey. It's quite an historic building. It was built in 1855 as a theatre, the Royal Theatre. Indeed, right to the end it still had a bust of Shakespeare above its entrance outside. It was also obvious that once you went inside that it had been a theatre. Later the Royal Cinema, and then a bingo hall, and eventually the Blue Monkey nightclub. It was a good nightclub. It was a cheap night on Thursday, so that was inevitably occupied by students and studenty music, but it was also well remembered for its rave nights. Sadly, it's probably best remembered for the infamous way in which it all ended. It was the scene of a murder inquiry early in 1992, and in 1994 it was set fire to, burned to the ground and eventually demolished. The fire could have been a lot worse, as there was actually a petrol station next door. It didn't get quite that out of hand. It was replaced by the new Monkey in Pallion some years later, and that closed to the lament of precisely no one. Here in Fawcett Street, the double door on your right behind me was the entrance to Bourbon Street. It didn't last very long. It was around in the first half of the 1990s for 2 or 3 years. Perfectly decent place, but just didn't keep up. This street, as all the best people know, is Frederick Street. The club we're about to refer to was mentioned, indeed it was the subject of a song by the Toy Dolls. In 1984 they had a smash hit, number 3, with Nelly the Elephant. The B-side was a song called Fisticuffs in Frederick Street, and it name-checked Foster's nightclub, which was, I regret to say, one of the buildings behind me, but I'm not sure which one. It later became Heroes, the joke of the time being that you had to be one to go in. Well, here in a rather noisy home side, behind me is a nightclub which opened, I think, in 1986, called Bentleys. We're cheating a bit here because clearly it's still trading as the excellent Illusions. It was beloved of apprentices of any gender on a Saturday night. They would all gather to worship their patron saints, all 3 of them, Stock, Aitken and Waterman. On a really good night, they might play Sonia. The site now occupied by Sunderland College was once upon a time Fusion. And this was before my time as well, nightclubbing. It was a classic Saturday night fever place apparently. The overwhelming aroma of allspice and bleach, glitter balls and so forth. Many a person would get in there and saddle up and ride your pony. Sometimes they got quite famous turns on, one of whom was Shack Attack. Fino's, along with Annabelles, is probably the best remembered on our list. Now the port of call, it was occupied the first floor of the building behind me. Popular back in the day among footballers, among other people. Footballers then loved only music with a sexy sax in the middle. And there's another connection here to local heroes, the Toy Dolls. They had a smash hit, number 93 hit in 1995 with a song called simply She Goes to Fino's, remembered by people who went to Fino's. Here in Merton Street there was a club that few people remember called Rascals. It was knocked down with little lament some years ago alongside an unappealing multi-storey car park to make way for Sunderland Software City. All I remember about it was that legendary DJ Michael Story, yes, Michael Story, had an evening called Slime Night every Monday featuring alternative music. So alternative in fact that no one except Michael Story had ever heard this music before or since. It was a particular favourite as Bentleys among people who operated circular saws.